Does gear matter? No, it doesn't.
What do you mean it doesn't matter? Of course gear matters.
Gear doesn't matter, you can just fix everything in post.
Partially true, yes, but doesn't having the right gear make getting the job easier?
Okay, how?
Do you want me to explain so you can see where I'm coming from?
Yes, gear matters. I said it, I mean it. Let me explain what I mean. First off, I do have a case of gas, gear acquisition syndrome, not the other gas, where if I could, I would have this whole shelf 3 times over completely loaded with gear. Right now there's 2 shelves in it completely loaded up, so it's a work in progress. Full disclaimer, everything you see in this video, I've got myself. I wasn't provided it by any company, no one sent it to me to review. Everything that you'll see moving forward is mine, except for this one tripod, which I've borrowed for the purpose of making this video. But moving on, if I was able to triple this shelf over and load it up with gear, would it actually make a difference to my photos and videos? And would it make a difference to your photos and videos? Well, yes and no. And let me try and explain what I mean, because I know that's confusing. And to make it easier to follow along, I put timestamps in the description below. So if you just want to see the part about camera bodies or camera lenses or all the accessories, you can skip through to whichever part you need. Gear absolutely matters, because whatever piece of camera gear you've got is a tool to do the job. In the same way that a carpenter has his set of tools to do the job, the same way a car mechanic would have a different set of tools to do their job. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean though. In the past 5 years, what have most camera manufacturers been promoting when it comes to the specs that they talk about with any new camera body they've released? The megapixels on the sensor, 45, 60 megapixel sensors, the frames per second, 20 frames per second or more, I think in some cases. And when it comes to videos, the video specs. 4K 120 frame per second video recording capabilities in 10-bit 422. But do all of these specs actually matter at the end of the day? Well, yes and no, because it depends on what your end goal is. If you do a lot of low light shooting, or you're not printing out overly large photos, you may not even need to invest in a full frame system. You could probably get away with a crop sensor camera that's got a relatively good sensor that isn't overly high in megapixels. So like something like my Sony a6400 that I'm using right now is 24 megapixels. And if I wasn't worried about printing large photos, and by large I mean anything bigger than this, you could easily use a crop sensor camera, or stay please. You could easily get a crop sensor camera, which isn't a bad option because they're often smaller, lighter, and easy to carry around. But if you still wanted a full frame camera, then you don't need to worry about getting something that's a high megapixel one like Sony's a7R4 or Nikon's Z7 or Canon's R5, which all have anywhere from 40 to 60 megapixel images. You could instead get something like Canon's R6 or Sony's a7S III, which I know is quite pricey. And if you were to print anything up to A3, you would still get relatively, very good images out of them if you paired it with the right lens, which lenses I'll get to in a second. On the flip side, if you did want to print large photos, then you would need to look into something like the A7R4 or the R5 or the Z7, because then you can comfortably print something twice as large as this without there being too much concern of the image being pixelated by the time you've printed it out at something like A1 or A0. So if you can have a large megapixel sensor, or even a medium format sensor for that matter, go for it if that's what you need. And that's just for photos. What about videos? For videos, the specs matter just as much as well, because as I mentioned, it all depends on what your end goal is. Prime example, every video I put up on YouTube now is filmed in 4K on my Sony a6400, which is a crop sensor camera. And you may be thinking, hang on, doesn't your Canon have a full frame sensor? And it does, but there's a few big reasons why I film on the Sony and not the Canon. One of them is that, and it's a big one, if I wanted to film 4K on my Canon, it's got a 1.8 crop factor. So when I all the way wide open at 15 millimeters, it's so far zoomed in, it's almost at 30 millimeters once you've added that crop factor in. So this 15 millimeter lens that I've got, well, 15 to 35 zoom, is nowhere near 15 millimeters. And the other reason is the file sizes that come out of this Canon compared to the Sony are 3 to 4 times larger, and that's because the Canon cameras have that much more data in the video files compared to the Sony. And the last two, one is more important than the other. Because of the huge file sizes that come out of the Canon compared to the Sony, that does again mean more hard disk space being used up. And even with my 1.5 terabytes on my laptop behind me, that always gets chewed up quite a lot as it is with the video that comes out of the Sony, that I just simply wouldn't be able to use it properly if I had the Canon. I would need to chuck out that hard disk and get a much bigger one installed internally if I wanted to work as efficiently as I do right now. And the last one being, my Sony can film 100 frames per second, the Canon can do a max of 60. That's both in high def, not in 4K, but if I wanted to do slow-mo and go slower than what the Canon offers, I can do that with the Sony, but I can't do that with the Canon. So those are good examples to show why the camera body you choose matters, because if the camera body doesn't have the specs you need to do the job you need, you'll have to go and find the camera body that does. And I often wonder if going with Canon was the right choice for me. So yes, the camera body you choose matters, and not just the specs of the camera body, but also the weight of it and the size of it and the battery power, that all plays a factor as well. Now you might be thinking, what the heck is Pien on about talking about the weight and the size of it? Oh, you also have to remember, like, if you remember last week's video, I talked about how you can stay healthy because we carry around mountains of gear with us. If you have two systems, one weighs 10 kilos, one weighs 15 kilos, which one would you be more likely to carry around with you? The 10 kilo one. So if you can get a camera body and lens set that weighs significantly less and gives you exactly the same results and is 5 kilos less, then wouldn't you get carried over the 15 kilos? But more important than camera bodies, and that's the lenses. Many photographers and videographers will say glass, 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 glass. And we always say that whatever lens you buy is always more important than the actual camera body. And there's multiple reasons for that. One of them is that lenses often cost a lot more than the camera bodies themselves, but they also last a lot longer, and there will be a larger determining factor in the quality of the image you're going to get. A prime example, I've got two Canon lenses here. This is my kit 24-105 f4 lens. This is my 15-35 f2.8 lens. Now, if you were to take a picture with each of these images at 24 or 30 or 35 millimeters at exactly the same aperture, same shutter speed, same ISO, you will notice that the images that come out with this lens are sharper than the images that come out with my kit lens. That's not to say that these images are not sharp, it's just that these are sharper. But at the same time, you sort of expect that because this lens is triple the price of this lens, or at least double the price. The quality of the glass in these two lenses is different. And it's not just the quality of the lenses, but also knowing which lenses are available to you when you decide to go with a particular camera brand. Now, many photographers start with a particular camera brand, and they often won't change throughout their whole photography career unless there's a significantly good reason. I've known colleagues that have stayed with the same brand for 20 years because it's got all of the lenses they need, and they see no need to swap brands when they've already got multiple camera bodies, and I've lost track of how many lenses some of them have. You need to ensure that whatever lens system you invest in has the lenses you need to do the job you need. Otherwise, you may be swapping systems out sooner or later, and it's much more expensive to do that than just start with the right system to begin with. Luckily though, most camera brands nowadays have so many lenses to choose from that this isn't too much of an issue, or if they don't have the exact lens you need for your particular camera, you can get an adapter to make a third-party lens work, but you may lose a few features here and there. I'm going to use Sony as an example because I think they've done an amazing job with their mount and opening it up to so many third parties that I often wonder if choosing Canon over Sony was the right choice. Sony opened up their mount to lots of third-party providers. Tamron, Sigma, Tokina, Samyang, the list is endless. You can even get adapters to use a Canon EF lens, not RF, the previous gen mount lens, on a Sony camera if that's what you wanted to do as well. And by doing that, they have made sure that as long as you've got a Sony body, you have got a wide range of lenses available to you that you don't get with Canon's RF mount. You get the Canon RF lenses, of which the number of lenses available is increasing. And if you get an adapter, you can use their previous EF mount lenses, which in their own right are amazing lenses as well. And sometimes the lenses you get from those third-party brands like Sigma and Tamron are often much more cost-effective than the equivalent Sony lens, and the images are sometimes just as good, if not better, than the Sony lens. But what about other gear? Oh, let's talk about tripods quickly. And you may remember I've got my three-legged thing Travis tripod, which I've had for nearly 2 years now, and I can't fault it. It suits my needs perfectly most of the time, but it's much better than an older tripod I used to have, which was a Manfrotto 290 Jewel something or other, and that one wasn't as great because it was a solid kilo heavier. This one is lighter, but it's just as tall as the Manfrotto was, and it's much easier to set up and use compared to that one as well. But if you wanted a smaller tripod, you can always get something like the Peak Design travel tripod, which this is the carbon fiber one. Remember, this isn't mine, I borrowed it just to make this video, but I'm not that much of a fan of it for a few reasons. One of them is it's not as tall as my three-legged things, but there is the cost factor of it. It's significantly more expensive, but also if you need to go full extended and you've got these little legs, I know it's carbon fiber, I know it's strong, but they just feel so flimsy that I'm always worried I'm going to break it. And for those reasons, I often don't use it. I can borrow it if I need to, but I still would rather take out my Travis tripod. It's just much more versatile and feels much stronger to use compared to the Peak Design one. But in saying that, this is a very good tripod. It's light, it's very small. I mean, if you have to carry both of them around when you're on the back of a motorbike or in a packed out, SkyTrain here in Bangkok, this one makes much more sense than my Travis tripod, but when fully extended, it just doesn't feel as strong. But it is very easy to set up and use, though, I can say that. So it's not a completely bad tripod, I'm just not a fan of it. Sorry, Peak Design, nothing against you, just personal preference. Another piece of gear that often gets overlooked is your camera bag. I've often said how I've got this camera bag. I do love it, don't get me wrong, but it is a bit too big to use in Bangkok when you're either on the back of a bike or in a packed out train because of the space it takes up. I do have this smaller Manfrotto shoulder bag, although it doesn't hold that much equipment. If you were just to go out with one camera and 2 lenses and nothing else, then yes, it would be fine. But because of those reasons, I went and bought a smaller backpack, which makes going around Bangkok a lot easier now. And if you look at the size differences between the two, you can see one is much bigger than the other. And you can understand why I use this bag instead of this bag. And this applies to every other piece of gear that you use. It could be something as simple as this L bracket, which makes going from portrait to landscape mode and back a lot easier when you're using a tripod compared to not having it. Before I had an L bracket, it was always difficult because rotate the camera, but then you've got to reset your composition because it's no longer the same spot since you're no longer right above the bore head. And everything else becomes an issue. The balance, the angle, the height, all of it. But at least with an L bracket, it's just a quick rotation and you're good to go. And the last example I'll use as to why gear matters is your computer. If you remember, I've still got my Gigabyte gaming laptop that's running behind me right now. It's nearly 2 years old and it still does an amazing job. And that's because I made sure I've got one with enough computing power that it can handle not just my photos, but my videos with relative ease. I know that if I didn't have a computer as powerful as this one, life would be a lot harder. I would need more time to edit, I would need more time to process, everything would just take up much more time. And as we all know, time is money. If you don't have a computer that can keep up with your editing needs, it's going to take more time to do whatever it is you need to do. And the more you do it, the more time it's going to take, which means the less you're going to get done. So if you get less done and you're doing this for a career, that means less money because you can't work as productive and efficiently as you should be able to if you did have a properly spec computer. Now, I hope everything I've said today makes sense as to why gear does matter. It does. You need to make sure you've got the right tool for the job, and all the gear that we've got, the camera bodies, the lenses, the tripods, the filters, everything, it's all tools to do the job you need. And you need to make sure you've got the right tool to do the job, otherwise you're not going to get the job done properly, or you're going to spend so much time trying to fix it that it's still not going to be as good as if you did have the right job properly to begin with. So if you have liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up, that will be greatly appreciated. And if you see what's coming up next week, which is where this photo was taken, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tick that little bell so you get a notification whenever a new video is released. I'll leave it there for now because I know I've rambled on like there's no tomorrow, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.